I spent 15 years building my family's business. Then my parents made my nephew CEO, and everything fell apart. 15 years of my life, 15 years of dedication, strategy, and sleepless nights, poured into building my family's business into something remarkable. And just like that, it was taken from me, handed to my 23-year-old nephew Dylan, a kid fresh out of college who struggles to pay rent on time. This week, my life was turned upside down, and the foundation I thought was unshakable crumbled beneath me. The company, a mid-sized manufacturing business, was more than a job to me. It was my life's work. Every decision I made was calculated to strengthen the business. Every sacrifice meant to protect the legacy my parents had started. I thought they trusted me, appreciated the blood and sweat I had invested. But now, it seems they've decided Dylan, the same nephew who once caused a fire in their backyard because he forgot how a grill works, is the better choice to lead. The worst part? They didn't even have the decency to tell me directly. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. A year ago, my mom, Linda, started hinting that Dylan might join the company. Over a family dinner, she suggested I show him the ropes. My dad, Richard, chimed in, saying it was time Dylan gained some real-world skills. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Keeping the business in the family wasn't unusual, and I had no problem helping my sister Olivia's son get some experience. Olivia and I weren't particularly close, but I welcomed Dylan as an intern, willing to teach him. That turned out to be my first mistake. Dylan, as it turned out, was not exactly competent. He showed up late, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed, and spent more time scrolling through his phone or chatting with staff than doing anything meaningful. When he did contribute, his ideas ranged from impractical to laughably absurd. I still remember him suggesting we invest in a fleet of drones to deliver products because it would look cool. I tried to be patient, chalking it up to his youth and inexperience. I even assigned him small projects, hoping he'd take the opportunity seriously. But Dylan treated the company like a summer camp, and instead of learning, he treated his position as a joke. Meanwhile, my parents seemed to see a completely different Dylan. They praised him endlessly, marveling at his big ideas and passion. It was as though they were blind to his incompetence, ignoring the fires I was putting out daily to keep things running smoothly, some of them literally, given Dylan's past antics. Then, 2 months ago, the situation took a turn. My parents began holding family meetings without me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but soon it became clear I was being excluded. My mom grew secretive, asking me vague questions about my long-term plans for the company. My dad brushed off my concerns, telling me to trust the process. Olivia acted like Dylan had already inherited the business, her smugness increasing with each passing day. The breaking point came last week. During a quarterly board meeting, after I delivered a detailed presentation on our year-to-date profits, my dad cleared his throat and dropped the bombshell. Effective immediately, Dylan would be taking over as CEO. At first, I thought it was a joke. I even laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline. But the room was silent. My mom was beaming with pride. Olivia wore a triumphant smirk, and Dylan leaned back in his chair as though he'd been running the show all along. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I argued. Of course I argued. I pointed out Dylan's complete lack of experience, his terrible work ethic, and his reckless attitude. But it was like talking to a brick wall. My dad dismissed my concerns, insisting that Dylan's fresh perspective and charisma would take the company to new heights. My mom chimed in, sweetly assuring me I'd still have a key role as a senior advisor. As if I should be grateful for being demoted in favor of a kid who didn't know the difference between gross profit and net income. Olivia, predictably, added fuel to the fire, suggesting it was time for me to let someone else have a chance. I was speechless, blindsided as Dylan shook hands with board members, basking in his new role like he'd earned it. When I confronted my parents after the meeting, they brushed me off again. My dad said he was ready to retire fully and didn't want to micromanage anymore. My mom insisted it wasn't personal, that they valued my contributions but believed Dylan was the future. That night, Dylan had the audacity to saunter into my office uninvited, leaning against my desk with that infuriating smirk. He casually told me this was just how things evolve, as if it were a natural progression. I told him to get out before I did something I'd regret. Since then, I've been in a fog, alternating between anger and confusion. I've only confided in Jessica, my best friend, who was as furious as I was. She pointed out the obvious. Dylan's promotion made no sense. My parents had always been pragmatic, even ruthless when it came to business. Handing the company to someone so inexperienced didn't fit their pattern. The situation quickly spiraled. Dylan wasted no time throwing his weight around, firing 3 of our longest-serving employees within his first week. These were people who had been with the company longer than I had, who knew its inner workings better than anyone. When I heard about it, I felt powerless. The reason? Dylan told the board we needed to shake things up, and that was just the beginning. I knew then that this wasn't just about Dylan. Something bigger was happening, and I had to figure out what it was. When the first shipment under Dylan's new supplier arrived late and incomplete, it wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a disaster, costing the company tens of thousands of dollars. Dylan, however, shrugged it off with an infuriatingly casual, "We'll figure it out." That single sentence encapsulated his entire approach to the business. Reckless, short-sighted, and oblivious to the consequences of his actions. But what truly ate away at me wasn't just the financial damage. It was how he treated the staff. Dylan might have had charisma, but it was the kind that belonged behind a counter serving frappuccinos, not leading a company. Respect, real respect, is earned, and Dylan had no interest in earning it. Employees started coming to me with stories of his unprofessional behavior, dismissive comments, inappropriate jokes, and an air of entitlement that screamed, "I'm untouchable." Ethan, our CFO, was the first to pull me aside after hours. I'll never forget the look on his face, the frustration etched into every line. "Caleb, I don't know how much more of this I can take," he said. "I've worked under you for years, and I've never seen the company in such disarray. Dylan doesn't listen to anyone. He's running us into the ground." I sighed, rubbing my temples, feeling the weight of my own helplessness. "I know, Ethan, but what can I do? My parents made their decision." Ethan hesitated, his voice lowering as he leaned closer. "There's something else," he said. "I don't think this is just about Dylan. Your parents have been acting strange. I've seen them having private meetings with Olivia. They're hiding something." His words confirmed what I'd been suspecting for weeks. This wasn't just about Dylan. There was something else going on, something bigger, and I was determined to find out what. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house, determined to confront them directly. My mom greeted me at the door with her usual warmth, but there was an edge to her smile, a tension that told me she knew exactly why I was there. My dad, on the other hand, barely acknowledged me, his cold demeanor setting the tone before I even spoke. "I need to understand why you made this decision," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Why, Dylan? Why now? And why didn't you trust me enough to talk to me about it?" My mom sighed, as if I were the one being difficult. "Caleb, we've been over this. It's not personal. We just think Dylan has the vision the company needs for the future." "The vision?" I repeated, incredulous. "He's barely been here a year, Mom. He doesn't understand the business. He doesn't respect the employees. He's already making mistakes that are costing us money. How is that the vision we need?" My dad finally spoke, his tone sharp and dismissive. "You're too emotional about this, Caleb. You've always been a hard worker, but leadership isn't just about hard work. Dylan has qualities you don't." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Qualities like what? Recklessness? Entitlement? What's really going on here? Neither of them answered. My mom looked away, avoiding my eyes, while my dad muttered something about not wanting to fight. Frustrated and defeated, I left, more certain than ever that they were hiding something. The next day, Jessica called to check in, as she always does. She's been my anchor through this mess, cutting through the fog of my frustration with her no-nonsense attitude. When I told her about my parents' evasive answers, she didn't hold back. "They're hiding something, Caleb," she said, "and I don't buy this next-generation nonsense. Your parents are smart. They know Dylan isn't ready. There's another reason they're doing this." She was right, of course. There had to be more to it. But what? Over the next few days, more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. I overheard whispers from employees about financial troubles. debts the company might be carrying that I'd never been told about. Ethan admitted that my parents had been pressuring him to keep certain financial details off the books. And then there was Olivia. She was practically glued to my mom's side, whispering in corners and throwing me smug, triumphant looks whenever she saw me. It didn't take a genius to see she was involved. Olivia had always been the golden child, the one my parents doted on. I'd spent my entire life working to earn their respect, while Olivia could do no wrong simply by existing. Now it seemed she was using that to her advantage, and Dylan was her pawn. The breaking point came when Brooke, one of the managers Dylan had fired, showed up at my house in tears. She handed me a stack of documents, her hands trembling. "You need to see this," she said. The documents were contracts Dylan had signed without consulting the board. Agreements that locked the company into high-risk deals that could bleed us dry if they went south. Worse, there were emails between Dylan and his best friend, Lucas, that hinted at kickbacks and under-the-table deals. My heart sank as I realized the depth of the mess Dylan was creating. But it also lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about my demotion anymore. This was about saving the company from being destroyed. The documents Brooke handed over were just the tip of the iceberg. That night, I spent hours combing through every email, contract, and memo she'd managed to salvage. What I found wasn't just evidence of Dylan's incompetence. It was evidence of something much darker. The first concrete clue came from a string of emails between Dylan and his best friend, Lucas, who, despite having no official role in the company, had somehow become Dylan's de facto advisor. Lucas's involvement alone was troubling. He wasn't an employee and certainly wasn't vetted by anyone qualified, but one particular email stopped me cold. In it, Lucas boasted about keeping everything off the radar and referenced a side deal that Dylan apparently owed him for. My stomach churned as I began to piece together what this could mean. Were they siphoning money from the company? I immediately called Jessica. She was more than just my best friend. She was the sharpest, most pragmatic person I knew, someone I could always count on to give it to me straight. As I explained what I'd found, her reaction was immediate. "This is big," she said. "If Dylan and Lucas are running some kind of scheme, you need to expose it before it's too late." She was right. This wasn't just about Dylan's incompetence anymore. This was criminal. But I couldn't go about it recklessly. Jessica reminded me I needed someone who could navigate this legally. "Do you have a lawyer?" she asked. I didn't, but I knew someone who could help. Marcus, an attorney I'd met through a mutual friend, had a reputation for being ruthless when it came to business disputes. I called him the next day, and after hearing my story, he agreed to meet. When I showed him the emails, he raised an eyebrow. "This is sketchy," he said, flipping through the printed pages. "But it's not enough to prove anything illegal. Yet, we'll need more. Bank records, invoices, anything that shows money changing hands." It was clear I needed to dig deeper. Under Marcus's guidance, I began gathering as much evidence as I could. Under the pretense of cleaning out my desk, a humiliating experience, to say the least, I returned to the office. While I was there, I managed to pull some key financial records from the company's shared drive. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. The company's financial health was in much worse shape than I'd realized. Over the past year, there had been a series of unusually large withdrawals from our accounts, all authorized by my parents. When I cross-referenced those transactions with contracts Dylan had signed, a disturbing pattern emerged. The payments lined up perfectly with deals involving Lucas's contacts. I couldn't sit on this information. I confronted Ethan, our CFO, who had always been straightforward with me. The look on his face when I showed him the records told me everything I needed to know. He'd known. "I didn't want to tell you this, Caleb," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "But your parents have been hiding a lot from you. The company's been in trouble for a while. Years, actually." I stared at him, floored. "Why didn't they tell me?" I demanded. "They didn't want to scare you off," Ethan said, almost apologetically. "And honestly, I think they were embarrassed. They made some bad investments, and things spiraled out of control. Bringing Dylan on wasn't just about succession. It was about finding someone who'd take risks, no matter how reckless." Ethan's words started to bring the picture into focus. My parents weren't just passing the torch to the next generation. They were desperate. But what were they so afraid of? The answer came from my mom, unexpectedly, during another confrontation at my parents' house later that week. My dad was out, leaving just the two of us in the kitchen. I didn't hold back this time. Mom, I know about the debts. I know about the bad investments. Why didn't you tell me? Her face fell, the weight of her decisions etched into every line. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely remorseful. We didn't want you to worry, Caleb, she said softly. We thought we could handle it on our own. Handle it how? I demanded. By handing the company over to Dylan? He's making things worse, not better. She hesitated, then finally admitted the truth. It wasn't just about the debts, she said. Your father and I, we were afraid of losing everything. Dylan reminded us of what we were like when we started the business. Young, ambitious, willing to take risks. We thought he could bring that energy back. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, Dylan isn't you and Dad. He's not ambitious, he's reckless. And now he's dragging the company into even deeper trouble. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But it didn't change the facts. Their fear of failure and desperation to revive the company's fortunes had driven them to gamble everything on the wrong person. Their decision had put everything I'd worked for in jeopardy. The final piece of the puzzle came from Olivia. I caught her in the parking lot outside the office one afternoon, cornering her before she could disappear. What's your role in all this? I demanded. You've been scheming with Mom and Dad from the start. What's your angle? She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. You always think you're the smartest one in the room, don't you, Caleb? This isn't about you. It's about the family. Dylan is the future, whether you like it or not. Why? I pressed. What do you get out of this? For the first time, her smug facade cracked. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she brushed past me. You wouldn't understand, she muttered. But her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Olivia wasn't supporting Dylan out of some misguided loyalty. She had something to gain. By the end of the week, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss. The company was in far worse trouble than I had imagined. My parents were hiding secrets, Dylan was running amok, and Olivia was quietly pulling strings. But giving up wasn't an option. Not yet. I had evidence, allies, and a growing determination to dismantle the web of lies that had taken over my family's business. The question was, how far was I willing to go? One thing I've learned is that desperation makes people dangerous. My family's actions weren't just reckless, they were calculated. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that my parents, Olivia, and Dylan were all entangled in a network of schemes that went far deeper than I'd imagined. If I wanted to reclaim control, I needed to take apart that network piece by piece. With Marcus's help, I spent weeks compiling evidence. Every email, bank statement, contract, and memo was examined, cross-referenced, and documented. What we uncovered was staggering. Lucas, Dylan's so-called advisor, wasn't just profiting from the company's deals. He was running a full-fledged scam. Payments were being funneled to a shell company Lucas owned, disguised as consulting fees. Many of the vendors Dylan had locked us into contracts with were overcharging for subpar services, and all of them had connections to Lucas. But that wasn't all. Olivia was involved, just as I'd suspected. A deeper dive into the financials revealed she'd been receiving commissions for bringing in new business partners. Partners who, unsurprisingly, had ties to Lucas. It was a perfect storm of nepotism and greed, and it was bleeding the company dry. When I showed this to Ethan, our CFO, his face went pale. I knew something was off, he admitted, but I never imagined it went this deep. Caleb, this could ruin the company. I know, I said grimly. That's why we have to act now. The next step was rallying the remaining employees who still believed in me. Brooke, despite being fired, was eager to help. I want to see Dylan crash and burn, she said bluntly. She still had connections inside the company and agreed to feed me intel on what was happening. Jessica, as always, was my unwavering support. She offered not just moral encouragement, but practical advice. You can't just expose them, she reminded me. You need a plan for what comes next. If you take Dylan down without a clear vision for the company's future, your parents will just find another scapegoat. She was right. So I began drafting a proposal a roadmap for stabilizing the company once I regained control. It wasn't flashy, but it was realistic. Cutting ties with shady vendors, renegotiating contracts, and rebuilding trust with employees were at the top of my list. Meanwhile, Marcus prepared the legal groundwork. He drafted a formal letter to the board outlining Dylan's misconduct and included enough evidence to demand an emergency meeting. We were ready to move forward when something unexpected happened. One evening, Brooke called me, her voice trembling. "Caleb, you're not going to believe this," she said. "Lucas is at the office after hours." "What? Why?" I asked, already reaching for my car keys. "I don't know," she said, "but he's in the conference room with Dylan, and they're going through documents." It looked shady. I didn't hesitate. I drove straight to the office. The building was dark except for a faint glow coming from the conference room. I crept closer, staying out of sight, and listened to their conversation. "Do you think he suspects?" Lucas asked, his voice low but tense. "Probably," Dylan replied. "But it doesn't matter. By the time Caleb figures it out, it'll be too late. Once we secure this deal, we'll have enough leverage to push him out completely." "And your parents?" Lucas asked. Dylan laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. "They'll do whatever I say. They're desperate for this company to stay afloat, and I'm the only one giving them hope." I clenched my fists, rage bubbling inside me. Dylan wasn't just incompetent. He was actively plotting against me. Worse, my parents were unwitting pawns in his scheme. Before I could stop myself, I stepped into the room. "Hope," I said, my voice cold and steady. "That's what you call this?" Dylan's face turned pale. "Uncle Caleb," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" "Watching you dig your own grave," I said, holding up my phone. "I recorded everything, Dylan. Every word. Care to explain?" Lucas bolted, muttering something about not wanting to get involved, while Dylan tried to salvage the situation. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, forcing a nervous smile. "We were just strategizing. Strategizing how to ruin this company." I shot back. "Because that's exactly what you're doing." Before he could respond, I walked out. I had everything I needed to bring this to the board, and I wasn't going to waste any time. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I looped in Ethan, Marcus, and Jessica, ensuring every piece of evidence was airtight. When the day finally arrived, I stood in front of the board with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "I've spent the past 15 years building this company," I began. "In less than a year, Dylan has nearly destroyed it. But I'm not here to dwell on the past. I'm here to present a solution." I laid everything out, the financial mismanagement, the shady deals, the nepotism, and the outright corruption. I didn't pull any punches. By the time I finished, the room was silent. My parents looked devastated. My mom was crying, her face buried in her hands, while my dad's expression was etched with guilt. Dylan, however, was livid. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted. "You're just jealous because I'm doing what you never could, thinking big." "Thinking big?" I repeated, my voice calm but sharp. "You mean stealing from the company and betraying your family?" "Yeah, real visionary." The board didn't need much convincing. By the end of the meeting, Dylan was voted out as CEO, effective immediately. But as satisfying as that moment was, the victory felt hollow. As I walked out of the boardroom, victorious but hollow, my parents refused to meet my eyes. Olivia, on the other hand, glared at me with such venom that it almost made me pause. She muttered something under her breath, likely another accusation of how I'd ruined everything. Jessica was waiting for me in the parking lot, her expression a mix of pride and sympathy. "You did it," she said softly, a faint smile on her lips. "Yeah," I replied, my voice flat. "But at what cost?" The company was mine again, but the family I'd spent my life trying to protect was in shambles. I wanted to feel triumphant, to revel in the victory of reclaiming what I'd built. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new battle. The day Dylan was ousted should have felt like closure, but instead, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. My parents looked broken, Olivia was seething, and Dylan was dangerous. He wasn't taking his removal quietly. A week later, Marcus called me with urgent news. "Caleb, we got a problem," he said, his voice tense. "Dylan's threatening to sue the company for wrongful termination. He's claiming you orchestrated a smear campaign against him." I nearly laughed. A smear campaign? All I'd done was expose the truth. "Doesn't matter," Marcus replied. "He's using this as leverage to negotiate a severance package. If he doesn't get what he wants, he's threatening to go public with accusations of family infighting and financial mismanagement. A public scandal. Just what we needed." Marcus warned me that even if we had evidence to disprove Dylan's claims, perception was everything. A public fight could scare off investors and further damage the company's reputation. I was furious but also deeply worried. Dylan wasn't just a spoiled kid playing CEO anymore. He was a legitimate threat. And worse, he wasn't acting alone. Over the next few days, with help from Brooke and Jessica, I dug even deeper into Dylan's connections. What we uncovered was explosive. Lucas wasn't just an opportunist. He was running a full-blown scheme to siphon money from the company. Payments disguised as consulting fees had been funneled into shell companies he controlled. And Olivia, she wasn't just a passive enabler. She was actively helping them cover their tracks. Her motivations became painfully clear. She had made a series of disastrous real estate investments that left her financially exposed. Olivia had used the commissions from Dylan's shady contracts to bail herself out, convincing my parents to sign off on deals under the guise of benefiting the company. I couldn't keep this to myself. I called another meeting with my parents, determined to confront them. This time, there was no holding back. With the evidence laid out in front of them, the room erupted. "How could you let this happen?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. "You trusted Dylan and Olivia over me, and now look where we are. The company is on the verge of collapse because of your decisions." My mom broke down in tears, her hands shaking as she tried to speak, while my dad sat in silence, staring at the table. Finally, he said, "We were trying to protect the family, Caleb. We didn't want to burden you with our mistakes." "Protect the family?" I shot back. "By giving the company to someone who didn't earn it? By hiding the truth from me? You didn't protect anyone. You made it worse." Olivia, predictably, tried to shift the blame. "Oh, come on, Caleb," she said with a sneer. "Don't act like you're some saint. You've made mistakes too." "Maybe," I said, locking eyes with her. "But I never stole from my own family." Her smirk disappeared, and for once, she had no comeback. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Dylan made his final move. He went to the press, spinning a narrative that cast himself as the victim. Articles with headlines like "Family Feud Rocks Local Business" and "Young Visionary Ousted by Power-Hungry Uncle" began flooding the internet. Investors started calling, worried about the company's stability. Employees were demoralized, unsure of what to believe. I felt like I was drowning, watching everything I'd fought for slip through my fingers. But then, Jessica came through with an idea. "If Dylan wants to play dirty, let's fight fire with fire," she said. "We need to show the world who he really is." With Marcus's help, we crafted a statement detailing Dylan's misconduct, complete with the contracts he'd signed, the kickbacks to Lucas, and Olivia's fraudulent commissions. It was a calculated risk, but we released it, knowing the fallout could be brutal. The gamble paid off. Almost overnight, the narrative shifted. Dylan went from being the underdog to the villain, and Olivia's credibility was destroyed. But the damage to my family was irreparable. My parents were humiliated. Their relationship with Olivia strained beyond repair. Dylan disappeared from public view, but not before leaving a cryptic message on social media. "This isn't over." The company survived, but just barely. It took months of damage control to rebuild trust with investors and employees. I reinstated Brooke and several other loyal staff members, relying on their expertise to steady the ship. Slowly but surely, we began to recover. My relationship with my parents, however, was a different story. They apologized, of course, but the damage was done. Knowing they'd chosen deception over honesty and trusted Olivia and Dylan instead of me created a rift that felt impossible to mend. As for Olivia and Dylan, they're out of my life for good. Olivia moved to another state, and Dylan bounced from one dead-end job to another. Part of me feels sorry for them, but mostly, I feel relieved. Jessica, as always, stood by me through it all. One night, over drinks, she asked me, "Was it worth it? You got the company back, but at what cost?" I didn't have an easy answer. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I do know this. I'm never letting anyone take it from me again." 6 months have passed since the dust settled. The company is stable, and for the first time in years, I feel hopeful about its future. It's more than a business to me. It's a legacy. And while it's been tarnished, it's still mine. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never let anyone undermine your worth. Stand your ground, fight for what you believe in, and don't be afraid to cut ties with those who hold you back, even if they're family. And if you're going through something similar, know that you're not alone. Resilience can rebuild what betrayal tries to destroy.